Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Been a long morning already.
Is. So it has been.
It has been working with Israel is, some mornings is just long.
Yes, that it is.
And I don't like working with them on Wednesday mornings because they're less. They'll be in tonight, but I gotta get it all done this morning, so. And it's chilly, but it will warm up. And the sun's coming out.
I figured out, I cured the Wi-Fi problem in this room.
How'd you do?
I'm using my phone for a hotspot.
I know who had that idea.
Morning. Joel. Good morning. Again.
Michael.
Good morning. Good morning. Got some bar over to stop. We'll stop. And they waited and waited and waited and waited.
Oh, that's one of those Godot minions. You wait and wait and wait for Godot, and Godot never shows up as the 10th.
Well, I made a call and somebody was nearby. Yeah, somebody was, a lot of people were nearby.
I still remember the time when we were short a bunch of years ago and somebody made a phone call and somebody's daughter came in her pajamas. You know, bedroom slippers and everything and fell asleep on the pew, but she made 10. It was,
Jim's still away.
Yeah.
Yeah. He probably himself, so he may not ever be back. He's coming back.
I know there was. I just don't know.
I think that's the schedule. He knows.
Okay, so we're going to start. We've done the movements. Now we're going to start doing concepts. And I want to, before we even begin, I want you to know that this is not something that you are required to agree with. We are going to be taking a look at different concepts from different viewpoints. This is an extreme viewpoint. This is a severely edited article by a philosopher, theologian, polymath, professor, whose name was Yeshayahu Leibovitz. I've mentioned him before. Yeshayahu Leibovitz is a theologian and philosopher who is probably the greatest theologian of the 20th century that no one listens to. And it's important to recognize that. He is Orthodox. He was, if you've ever heard of Nechama Leibovitz, this is her brother. And truth in advertising, I became very involved with his writings because in the early 90s, I went to an institute in Jerusalem called the Hartman Institute, run by a man named David Hartman. I don't want to interrupt if you're.
I'm listening.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were going to talk into it.
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, Yeshayahu Leibovitz taught us. They would prevail upon him to come in for a couple of sessions each time, and they were fascinating. They were also very disturbing. He represents a form of Orthodox Judaism, which is very extreme. One could call him a Litvak's Litvak. So let me explain. When we say Litvak, does anyone, do you know what that means?
yes.
It's an I'm from Missouri type of person. He will not, a Litvak is not someone who believes in anything but rational explanations, and he has to see it in order to believe it. If you looked up in a dictionary or an encyclopedia under the word Litvak and it had a picture, it would have his picture.
I thought it
Yeah.
came, I thought it came before you came from.
Yeah, Litvak is a person, usually it denotes someone from Lithuania, but-
That's.
right? But it's also a form of Torah study. It's a very severe, anti-mystical view of the world. And so we're going to see his view, and that's why his view is not only extreme, but it's also right. So let me give you an example. One of Yeshayahu Leibovitz's big issues is the concept of idolatry. Okay, you know, there are oak trees, there are maple trees, there are idolatries, but idolatry is a very important thing for him. And one of his big issues is that just about everyone's an idolater.
Including himself.
At times he would say he did too. Have you been to Israel? And I've asked this before another, have you been to the wall? Did you pray at the wall? Why? Right, at the time. Why not, if you were gonna, did you put a little note in? You're idolaters. You are.
The wall was the only place they put the little paper somewhere, or the room, or somebody's hiding.
That's idolatry.
The same thing, and that's what a friend of mine told me, that's how I go worship.
Right. Now, the question is, why is it idolatry? And the answer is, if God is, and this is a Litvak's point of view, if God is everywhere and everywhere the same, which is a tenet in Judaism, then there is no one place that you can go to experience God more than another place. So if you went to the wall and put a note in, you were under the impression that talking to God at the wall was a local call, as opposed to a long distance call. That expectation means that you think that there are places in the world that are holier than others. And the answer is, that's not true. Because if God is everywhere and everywhere the same, every place is holy. So, by the way, I'm an idolater too. So I didn't put a note in the wall, but when I go to my parents' graves, I talk to them.
Yeah.
We're idolaters. And so one of the things that Leibovitz impresses upon us is that Judaism is a religion of inconsistency. Which sometimes descends into hypocrisy, but that there's a big difference between being inconsistent and being a hypocrite, which, as he would say, most Jews do not understand. They look at inconsistency and they see hypocrisy, but that's not necessarily the case. Okay. With that, would you begin reading?
The mitzvot or ritual commandments enjoined by the Torah are to be regarded first and foremost as religious praxis, accepted practice. As such, the mitzvot are the ground of the living religious reality known as Judaism. The mitzvot are to be understood not in terms of their so-called philosophical reasons, but rather as the matrix of Judaism as one lives it and is capable of living it in the here and now, in the everyday life of the believing Jew who has bound his life to the rule of God's Torah.
So we're going to take a look at the concept of mitzvah from Leibovitz's point of view. Why do we keep kosher?
The Torah.
And that's his answer. If you keep kosher, it's in the Torah. It's a mitzvah. Why do we pray? Because it's a mitzvah. That's the only reason that's acceptable. If you say we keep kosher because it's more ethical, his response is, no, it's not. And by doing that, he avoids some pitfalls. So for instance, if someone comes to me and says, or if I go to someone and say that I keep kosher because it's healthier, because after all, we know that pork would give us trichinosis. Well, if my medical knowledge is such that I know that boiling the pork or cooking it at a certain degree kills all of the parasites, then what is the reason for not eating pork? If I believe in the ethical construct of the mitzvot, that there's an ethical reason for them, when the ethical reason no longer applies, then I don't have to do the mitzvot. That's his criticism of liberal Judaism, which is liberal Judaism has the ability to decide not to perform mitzvot because they have to have a rationale for the mitzvot. But ultimately, the only rationale is that God commanded it.
I have something, there's in places in the Torah, they talk about if somebody disobeys, if you've got a disobeying kid,
Mhm.
you can kill them,
Yes,
and that's what you do. Because it's in there.
yes. But he would then say, because you have a written law and an oral law, the Talmud takes that law and effectively legislates it out of existence. So for instance, is everyone familiar with that? When you
Yes.
have a stubborn and
Yes.
rebellious child, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says you have a stubborn and rebellious child, then you kill them. Actually, you don't necessarily kill them. The elders of the town have to kill them. That was a big thing for me with my kids. I'm not, I've said it many times, used to tell them, just remember, but that's in the Torah. But Leibovitz is Orthodox, and therefore the Talmud is the oral Torah. And the rabbis get a hold of that, and they say, anyone here a lawyer, by the way? Okay.
Oh, boy, this is one of the few
So-
times.
So a stubborn and rebellious child, the question then becomes, what is the definition of stubborn? What is the definition of rebellious? What is the definition of child? And then the first thing they do is remember that Hebrew is a gender-specific language. So the phrase in Hebrew is ben sorer umoreh. Ben is a son. So the first thing they say in the discussion is, since it's a ben sorer umoreh, it can't be a girl.
Right.
So they've taken out all of the girls, and then the definition of stubborn is that much more limiting. The definition of rebellious, and by the way, this is like 15 pages of Talmud.
Right.
And then the definition of child. What is the definition of a child? And they actually go into how many pubic hairs the child has in order for it to be a child versus an adult. And so they get, after 15 pages of Talmud, they get to the point of saying it is in order for this child to be classified as a capital crime, it would be impossible. And finally, after 15 pages, the rabbis then say, this never happened. So that's an issue of how do you legislate something out of existence? The law is still in the Torah, but the oral Torah makes it impossible for it to be done. And that happens several times, by the way. Another area where it happens is capital punishment, where, and we've gone through this before, that even though the Torah specifies that there is something called capital punishment, it makes it almost impossible to ever convict someone of a capital crime. Yeah.
I was gonna say, for the stubborn child, isn't there also the caveat that they have to be recalcitrant or unable to be changed by appropriate direction and guidance?
And then they define
So
what the guidance is.
that's another, right,
I mean,
and so it's
right.
can be made
Right.
very loose and flexible.
So that's where he would go with that. But there are other mitzvot in the Torah that are not modified by the Talmud, which he would then say it's a mitzvah. You still have to do it. And it doesn't matter. It's not a question of why do we do it, because that's immaterial. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Joel. Go ahead.
As a religion of mitzvah, Judaism is an institutional religion. It's institution, the mitzvah, not its dogmas and values define its spiritual content. Accordingly, Judaism is not an abstract confession faith, but is rather an empathetic and concrete faith grounded in a complex of well-defined religious deeds and ritual practices.
Okay, so,
Did you say this was Leibovitz?
yeah, this is Yeshayahu, it's at the bottom, it's at the very end.
Yes.
It's
Thank you.
Yeshayahu
I
Leibovitz.
got it. Thank you.
So, if you do the mitzvot and you are spiritually moved by doing the mitzvot, you may not be doing them correctly. So in other words, if you are praying, if you are davening, and you get into the davening and you are completely immersed in it, and you have a divine experience where you feel closer to God, Leibovitz would say, that's not the point of davening. Praying is not supposed to get you closer to God. Praying is praying, period. And if you are spiritually moved, you might be doing it wrong.
This is a very concrete, literal approach.
He is, as I said before, he's a litvak's litvak.
Got it.
Now,
It's a verbal sacrifice.
that's right. That's all it is. It's instead of a sacrifice, it's a verbal. So let me give you an example. If you were ever moved by prayer, did you ever close your eyes while you were praying?
Sure.
Doing it wrong.
Because then we can't see it.
You are required to keep your eyes open. That's in the Shulchan Aruch, by the way. It's in the Code of Jewish Law. You are required to look at the words when you say them, because if you say them from memory, you might be getting them wrong. The only exception is the Shema, because you cover your eyes.
What if you pray something that's not written down in the prayer book?
It's not prayer,
Not prayer.
right?
I,
It's not a prayer.
I have problems when people think they get into somebody else's feelings and thoughts and actions. Do we have that right to do that?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Do we have the right to get into someone else, whichever way they address God? That's
Yes.
a private thing, I mean, that's an individual thing, I would not trespass it in there.
But it's not. Now remember, this is according to Leibovitz. Don't go home and tell your parents that Rabbi Bayar said that this is the right way to do things. Okay? Don't go home and say that. Zoomers, I am sorry. I didn't post the document. Nope, that's not it. Hold on. I apologize, Zoomers. Ugh. It's not 21.
It's good.
Okay, Zoomers, you should have the document in front of you now. Okay, for those of you who came in just now, this is a document on, it's an article on mitzvot from a theologian named Yeshayahu Leibovitz. It's an extreme Orthodox, rational view of what the mitzvot are. Okay, so what he's saying also then is that if you are going to be spiritually moved, you are moved by our institutions, but you are not moved by the mitzvot. And he's going to define that, what that exactly that means. But this is a concrete faith.
Okay, if you're reformed.
Yeah.
And you're not recognizing all the mitzvot,
Right.
then what does he consider those people?
Reform is not a valid form of Judaism. No, they're Jewish, but it's not a valid form of being Jewish. That's why, yes. And by the way, you can see why a lot of Orthodox wouldn't agree with him either. But it's important this is an extreme, from my point of view, this is an extremely point of view to understand, because we build off of that. And so, for instance, when we talk about Hasidism, the reason that one of the reasons that Hasidism actually was created was to counterbalance this point of view. Because in Hasidism, it's exactly the opposite, that the mitzvot are spiritually oriented, and that if you don't exactly get the mitzvot correctly, it's okay, as long as you are moved to be closer to God. Which is why, so when I was first married and I was in Israel, my wife had a very good friend who was much older than one of her teachers. His name was Rabbi Alexander Karlbach. He at one time had been the chief rabbi in Ireland, which was basically, he was the only rabbi in Ireland. He made Aliyah to Israel, and you may know his cousin, Shlomo Karlbach. Karlbachs are all related. So Alexander Karlbach didn't talk to Shlomo Karlbach because Alexander Karlbach was a Yekka, which is there are Litvaks, and then there are Yekkas. And Yekkas are on a completely different realm. They are, so you know what a Yekka means?
No,
Oh, a Yekka is a German Jew.
okay.
Gotcha.
Okay. A Yekka is called a Yekka. It's a derogatory term.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a derogatory term because it means jacket. So when the German Jews made Aliyah to Israel in the late 1800s, Israel's a shirt sleeve society, they wore jackets and ties. So the Israelis call them Yekkas, stuffed shirts.
Got it.
So the way to explain what a Yekka really is, and I married into a Yekka family going back to the 1600s. So I had a field day. So there was once a joke that was so funny that whoever heard it died laughing. So the person was brought up on charges of murder because everyone who heard the joke died. So they're in the courtroom and the judge says, I've told this joke before, haven't I?
Yes, you have.
I have.
So maybe not to this.
But I
side.
get you to, so pretend you forgot it. So pretend you forgot it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so so the judge says, I have to hear it. Well, Your Honor, if I tell you the joke, you're going to die laughing. So they cleared the courtroom, and only the judge and the defendant were there. And then there's one Yekka who decided he wanted to hear the joke. So he hid in the back of the courtroom. And the man tells the joke and the judge died.
The end.
That's a Yekka. So Alexander Karlbach, and when I would spend Shabbos with them, we would walk to his shul. And you know that Friday night services are made up of Kabbalat Shabbat, the first Psalms from the beginning of the Friday night service, and then Mariv, where we do the Baruch Hu and then we do everything else. He would bring a book. And during Kabbalat Shabbat, when Lachadodi and all those things, he would sit and read his book because Yekkas and Litvaks do not do Kabbalat Shabbat. And then when it got to Mariv, when it got to the evening service, he would then take part in the service. So I asked him, why don't you do Kabbalat Shabbat? And the answer was, do you know who wrote Kabbalat Shabbat? The mystics. He said, we don't do those prayers. Okay. So, and this goes to anyone who thinks that Orthodox is monolithic. It's not. It is, the variations in orthodoxy are wide. It's a very big tent. So, would you take the third paragraph?
To be sure.
To be sure, there is a battle interdependence between the institutional reality of religion and its values and beliefs. The nature of this relationship often depends, however, on the spiritual disposition of the individual. Thus, there are religious individuals for whom faith is prior to their religious praxis, and others for whom religious praxis is prior to their faith.
So, simply put, there are some Jews who believe but don't do, Or the reason that they do the mitzvot is because they have faith. And there are some Jews who the reason they have faith is because they do the mitzvot. Very simple. Would you take the next paragraph? Would you take the next paragraph? Would you take it?
There are individuals who, from a world of abstract values, dogmas, and feelings of obligation, seek the realization of these values in a specific form of life. And there are others who would come to a world of values through having accepted a specific form of life and religious practice, the yoke of institutional religion, which in turn also leads them to faith. Whoever has a basically religious temperament will attain religious values and faith only through institutional religion. Hence, it may be said that a Jew is one who attains religious values and faith by virtue of the mitzvot, which bear not only Judaism's values, but also its categories of religious knowledge and feeling.
Okay. Clear as mud?
What is a
Yeah.
basic religious temperament?
Someone who's just basically religious.
Right.
Well, someone who wants to be religious. So this is one of his greatest criticisms of liberal Judaism. Okay, so if you have faith, but you do not have, but you are not observant, then you do not have faith. If you, I'm sorry,
If you're secular.
no, if you have faith.
Okay.
So let's take, as liberal Jews, I think it would be fair to say that we have more faith than observance. Would anyone disagree with that?
Yeah. I don't- Who's to say? I mean,
He is,
He is, okay, he is, according to him.
according to him,
According-
that traditional Jews have more observance than faith.
Yeah.
So this
They
goes
have
back,
more observance, but they, according to him, they have.
They may or may not.
they may or may not have faith.
Yeah.
See, to him, the most important thing is whether you observe the mitzvot.
You walk the walk,
Right,
you know.
Right,
Right.
right, whether you walk the walk.
Right,
The talking of the talk, to use your metaphor, talking the talk is immaterial to him. Do you walk the walk?
right,
So if I am an atheist, but I'm Shomer Shabbos, I am more valid a Jew
Right.
than someone who believes in God but doesn't keep Shabbat. So, and he's right. From a halachic point of view, the only thing that matters is halacha. Has anyone ever heard of Shlomo Riskin? Okay. Shlomo Riskin was one of the premier modern Orthodox rabbis in the United States. He was the rabbi of Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan, which was one of the flagships of modern Orthodoxy. And it was a hotbed of Jewish observance and Jewish programs and everything. And it must be 30, 40 years ago, he decided he was going to make Aliyah to Israel. And it was a big blow to his community because he was very, very popular. And he wrote an article for an op-ed in the local Jewish papers about why he was moving to Israel. And he said, the reason I'm moving to Israel, one of the main reasons is I can't do all of the mitzvot in outside of Israel. In Israel, I can perform more mitzvot than I can. And so therefore, from a purely mitzvah observant point of view, it's important for me to go to Israel. And had he stopped there, he would have been fine. He then made the next comment that the most secular Jew in Israel is more observant than the most observant Jew in Brooklyn. And that just blew up completely. He meant to, because he was telling people, he was telling the Orthodox community, it's not enough what you are doing in outside of Israel. You got to move to Israel.
What can you do in Israel that is good?
There are mitzvot in Israel. There are 365 mitzvot. By the way, there aren't 630. I was thinking days.
Right.
There really aren't 613 mitzvot. I don't know if you're aware of that. We
Yeah.
believe that was just some rabbi making a statement. There are thousands. There are thousands of mitzvot. So for instance, it says to keep Shabbat. Okay. Shabbat is actually 2 mitzvot of the 613. It's a positive mitzvah, you're supposed to keep the Shabbat, and it's a negative mitzvah, you're not allowed to do work on Shabbat. And then the rabbis get a hold of it.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of mitzvot that you can do on Shabbat.
Right.
But many of those mitzvot can only be done, many of the mitzvot can only be done in Israel,
Why?
because Israel is the promised land. And there are mitzvot that are endemic to Israel itself.
Okay.
Is that idolatry?
Leibovitz would say it is. Absolutely.
So,
Because Israel doesn't retain its holiness until the Mashiach comes. Up until that point, it's just another place.
so I was gonna say, this perspective is in opposition to the discussion we had earlier regarding
Right.
the conversation with interpreting some of the mitzvot that did not seem to be
Right.
relevant. And according to this, we're talking about all the mitzvot.
Right.
And one is not more than the other. It's either, and that's how the Jew is defined by observation of all the
Right.
mitzvot.
Okay. Okay. So we're still Jewish? Okay.
According to who?
I'll tell you, he's not, I would not have wanted to date his daughter.
Well, it wouldn't have lasted long.
Just because I'd hate to have him as a father-in-law, especially as a conservative rabbi. I definitely wouldn't. Okay. So would you take the next paragraph?
The primary features of Judaism as a religion of mitzvot is that it is primarily a religion of the ordinary, unexceptional individual who is not necessarily blessed with a spiritual disposition. In consonance with this fact, Judaism is also a realistic religion. It apprehends the individual in his concrete everyday existence and regards him in light of this reality, and not in terms of a vision of an ideal reality.
Yeah,
Whoa.
it's like, so in a traditional minyan, when you say the Amidah, the silent prayer, the person who's leading the minyan will then repeat it. Okay. Why? Does anyone know?
Because the ordinary individual may not have gotten it right.
That's correct. That Judaism is a very practical religion. Many of the things that we do are because the rabbis recognized that when you say the Amidah, most people don't necessarily say it. They're just silent. So therefore, since we know you didn't say it, we're going to say it again so that you can hear it.
Because they were illiterate at that time.
They might be. Part of it may have been that way, but then why continue it now? Literacy is
Right.
so. Now, ironically, by the way, most liberal congregations do a Heicha Kedusha, which is what we do in the morning and usually on Shabbat, where you do the first several prayers out loud, and then you do everything else privately. Now, ironically, in Orthodox Judaism, they will do that as well. Why will they do that? You are only supposedly allowed to do a Heicha Kedusha, a partial saying it, when you are positive that everyone is actually going to say the Amidah. So the best time to see this is go to an airport, go to Israel and go to an airport and get there an hour or so earlier than normal, and you'll see everyone's looking for a minyan. And by the way, that is, in my opinion, that's the most, if you will, that's the most ecumenical place in Judaism, because when you need a minyan, you will see Haredim davening with Hasidim davening with Reform Jews. It doesn't matter because they need a minyan, especially on the airplanes.
Right.
So the point being, but they will usually do a Hechi Kedusha because it's faster and they assume everyone is doing it.
Interesting.
Okay. So, but it is a religion for the ordinary, unexceptional individual. In other words,
The adult.
As I said.
it's not even that. You're not expected to do more than you're supposed to do. So for instance, one of his big concepts is, okay, so if I'm required to do a mitzvah, and it would say, let's say for the moment that I'm going to keep kosher. Now, it is considered by many that a higher form of kashrut is to be a vegetarian, because that's what the Torah originally intended, that we would all be vegetarians. Leibovitz is saying, if you think that by being, let me a better example, there are those people who keep Shabbat in different ways. So one of the big issues in the Orthodox community is if you have an eruv, which is it's an artificial wall, can you play baseball in the eruv on Shabbat? Now, the reason is that it's not a Shabbat activity. So there are many people who say you should not play baseball or basketball or any sport on Shabbat, you should be studying. Leibovitz would come and say, that's ridiculous. If it's allowed, you're allowed to do it. And if it's not allowed, you're not allowed to do it. If you're allowed to play baseball on Shabbat in certain circumstances, then you can play it. It doesn't mean anything if you do or you don't. So don't try to do more, and don't try to be more observant. Don't try to be a chanyak. And we know what a chanyak is, right?
No, good.
Ah, okay. And this is Yiddish class 101 today.
Yeah.
So we've learned what a litvak is, and we've learned what a yeka is. A chanyak is someone who dies and goes to heaven and won't eat there because he doesn't trust the supervision.
There you go. I like
Okay.
that. I like the chanyak. That's awesome.
And there's a very long joke about it, but I'm not going to bore you with it.
I like that.
Okay. So a chanyak is someone who's more religious than everyone else and strives to be and doesn't accept anyone else. So
That's funny.
I'm sorry.
Would that apply to the first holier than now?
Yes, a chanyak is someone who insists on being holier than thou and looking down on everyone else. So the point being that the mitzvot are a standard of living, and that's all you have to do. You don't have to do more, but you can't do less. Yeah.
So the way this paragraph and the one to follow are, these two are presented, it reminds me of, we used to say in the Army, it's very institutional, very large. So you try to get things done or have extenuating circumstances. It could be impossible. For example, getting a CAT scan, you have somebody at the front desk, and I
Right.
say his job is to get the right form with the right things filled out for the right reasons of what we call square block and square hole. You come up with a rectangle. Hey, this is an emergency. We have this. We ran out of that. He doesn't have the authority, doesn't have the information to do anything else than just take and put the square block in the square hole. And that's all he does.
And he's not allowed to do it.
Right, he's not allowed, all he'll say is.
No
you know,
initiative. You
right,
don't take the
and
initiative.
He can't make any exceptions. He doesn't have the authority. He doesn't have the understanding. He just can't.
Right.
So people will get hot, they'll get blue, and finally, all you do is you say, "Is your supervisor here?" "Oh, it's Sergeant Smith. Go talk to him. Here's his number." He's not allowed. He doesn't know, but he'll tell you who to talk to if you just ask him. But I think this is very, very concrete.
Right.
And it's presented as we are just supposed to take
Right.
this for what it is, square block and square
Right.
hole.
So going back in the 17th century, Judaism had, or Jewish observance or knowledge had, you can either say evolved or devolved into, it was a very rationalistic religion, that the way in which you were devout was to study Talmud. If you couldn't study, then you were a second-class citizen. And the Baal Shem Tov, who is the founder of the Hasidic movements, comes forward and says exactly the opposite, which is if you want to get close to God, you have to feel. And so singing and dancing become extremely important. And it captures Judaism like wildfire. And to the extent that we believe in the places where Hasidism started, that there were at times more Hasidim than there were non-Hasidim in these areas. And that's one of the main reasons why, for a couple of hundred years, the rationalist rabbinic Judaism was at odds with Hasidic mystical Judaism. And what we're seeing is the extreme of the rationalist point of view. So, Susan, would you read the next paragraph of Judaism?
Judaism is concerned with the individual's tasks, obligations, and responsibilities in his concrete, mundane existence, and renders it impossible for him to evade his responsibilities through the deception of attaining a different, higher reality. Mitzvot are norms for this humdrum existence, the real and constant reality of man. Halachic religion is not enthusiastic about the ecstatic, unusual episodes of one's spiritual life. This is the very strength of Judaism. A religion that primarily seeks to promote spiritual exaltation and even ecstasy is a religion of poetry, a religion that is principally an ornament to life. The religion of mitzvot is the religion of life itself.
Okay. This is an extremely important point, because actually all the movements on some level do accept this. This is his criticism of Christianity and also of Hasidism. So, and the reason being, if your goal is to be spiritually moved, how often does that actually happen? And if that's your goal, and that becomes a priority in life, then mitzvot don't become important. And yet the mitzvot of doing everyday life, doing the mitzvot, is what keeps us together. You know, Achad Ha'am made the statement, Achad Ha'am was a Zionist in the early 20th century, made the statement that more than the Jews kept Shabbat, Shabbat kept the Jews. That it's the mitzvot that hold us together, not otherwise. We don't hold the mitzvot together.
And how does he balance that with his idolatry?
The reason you do mitzvot is because you are supposed to do mitzvot. That's it. It's not, and you do the mitzvot, and that's what your life is.
Right.
And it leads you through your humdrum, mundane existence.
Square block,
You know,
square
it sort of
hole.
requires you don't have to think at all.
Right.
Because
Right.
you're adult, because it's the mundane ordinary.
Right.
But there is, I'm thinking about my.
B'Tselem Elohim.
Mhm.
Mind, you have a physical heart,
Mm-hmm.
you have an emotional body, and you also have a spiritual self.
Yes,
It's a spiritual self plus. We feed our body, we do the mind, we study, blah, blah, blah. And what about the spiritual self? What happens to that? I think that this is where those movements are like the Hasidim.
yes.
When
Mhm.
they ask for the spirit, that's our spiritual side that's in action. And I think that happens according to evolution. I mean, the evolution of the soul. So
Mhm.
the more evolved a person is going to act differently from the person over here. That maybe has not evolved.
Right. So let's take a look at the alternate, at the other side of the coin. One of the dictates of clergy in congregations is, and especially of cantors, is that you have to be very careful when you change things. Because when you change them, that when people leave their comfort level, then all of a sudden things are a little different and the dynamics are different, and usually people end up hating you. I once worked with a cantor for 3 years, and the first high holidays, unilaterally, he changed just about every single melody we'd been doing for years. And I remember we had a woman who was a federal judge in the district. And she was very, very respected, very even-tempered. And she took him outside and she started crying because the melody that she had had for 55 years, he changed.
Right. Of course.
Now, his response was, I changed it because I believe this melody is much more spiritually moving.
Good.
And that I wanted a different experience.
Good.
And her response was, but nothing is going to take the place of what I grew up with. Now,
Of course.
in Leibovitz's world, if the cantor changed the melody, the more important thing is they did the prayer.
Right.
The melody is immaterial.
Mm.
So if you want to change the melody, that's fine. In the spiritual world, if you don't do the melody, if you don't do it the way people are used to do it, then there's no innovation at all. So there are two sides of the coin. On one hand, if you want to be spiritually moved, it's much harder to find a congregation that spiritually moves you.
Because it's an individual.
Right, but it's an individual thing that's being done in public
Mhm.
Yeah.
with a congregation.
Where people are all like,
That's
With
right. And
like-minded
everyone is not only on their own level, everyone has their own comfort level.
Mhm.
So for instance, the cantors are told, and the rabbis are told also, don't change anything for a year. But it's impossible to know everything you're supposed to do or not do. So what Leibovitz is saying is, if you buy into what he's saying, the only important thing is doing the mitzvot. Don't expect to be spiritually moved, because that's not a goal. But the other side of the coin is, we pray in order to be spiritually moved. So if something doesn't move us, or if something changes, then it has the exact opposite effect. What he's doing is saying there's a least common denominator, which while we do that is fine. Your point is not only valid, it's correct, but so is his.
Right.
It's just from a different point of view.
So, we are seeing this book. It's a poem, concept of poem. With these, someone yourself, what is an poem?
It's not.
Not according to him. According to him, the reason we do the mitzvot is because we do the mitzvot.
But, yeah, and then, the spiritual part of it, we don't know all the ideas, we're the same, but we're not the same. So different people are at different levels of spirituality.
Right.
But it's not right that the ones that are not there yet or criticize it. So the answer to that is not yet. It's not there
But you
yet.
see, when you make that statement, you are making an assumption that someone who is in a higher spiritual level is superior
No.
to someone who's not. Well, you said, well, they're not there yet.
Yeah, well, for certain beliefs, it's because because they're living in emotion. If this is a not yet looking down, it's better you haven't gotten.
So if you look at just to
The more you.
the last paragraph on the first page, there's a sentence right in there that goes directly at that. The life of mitzvot, which obligates a person from earliest maturity to death, is not affected whatsoever by any spiritual achievement one may attain. This is just his perspective, not
Right, but his
Right.
perspective is a major.
Right.
Is living the concept
Right.
world,
Right.
the carnal matter, you know, the spiritual is an individual thing, and
Right.
yes, it should not be being publicized. It should not, this is something between you and
Right.
whoever
Right.
brought you here. And it doesn't need to be advertised. It's not something you do.
Right.
or-
But he's saying it's also not something that's important.
Well, it says his opinion.
That's right, that's his
Exactly.
opinion.
This
By
whole
the way,
thing is
as an
his
aside,
opinion,
do you know,
just to
And
understand
it's
where he's coming
do you
from.
know, the significance of the phrase "not yet"?
Not yet is that somehow, as human,
No, Right, no, I'm asking, do you know the significance of that phrase? Okay. There is a philosopher in the early 20th century named Franz Rosenzweig, there were three best friends. One was Franz Rosenzweig, the other was Martin Buber, in case you're familiar with that name.
Sure.
And the third was Max Grunewald. Max Grunewald was my rabbi emeritus in Milburn.
Wow.
So the three of them were a team. And Rosenzweig and Buber combined to write the first translation of the Bible into German in like 500 years. So Rosenzweig was a secular Jew who had decided to convert to Christianity in the early 1900s. And he said he's just going to go to Yom Kippur services one more time, and then he was going to go to church. Something happened in the Yom Kippur services, and he had a cathartic experience, and he came out, and he then became very Jewish. He died a very tragic death, but he wrote stuff. He wrote material that was incomprehensible. I mean, German philosophers are incomprehensible to begin with, but Jewish German philosophers are in their own category. So, and I was plagued. I had to study him in graduate school. So he was once asked by a religious observant rabbi, do you put on tefillin? And his response was, not yet. And that becomes within our tradition, the cry of, are you doing something? Not yet. So, which implies eventually we'll do it. So right, but it also means that I should be putting on tefillin from his point of view. I should be putting it on, but I'm not ready to do that yet. So, right.
To experience something.
I would tell you, I have great sympathy for what Leibovitz writes, because there's a lot of validity to it. Because the spiritual quest, my experience is that people who are on a spiritual quest are few. And that what most people are trying to do is just get through the day in Judaism. And what he's saying is, you want to get through the day, just do the mitzvot. That's it. You don't have to worry about, there's nothing major about this. This is just do the mitzvot. So it's a very, as I said, least common denominator, very comforting. And what he's also saying is, look, life is mundane. Life is not the highs or the lows. Life is just getting through the day. And the mitzvot are designed to help you get through that day.
Sunset.
Still leaves room for spirituality, but It's a matter of
room.
priority. It's a
That's
matter of priority.
Right.
The top priority is to perform the mitzvot.
That's right.
I agree with that, too, but I don't think it's fair to criticize someone else by the belief system that you have to be more spiritual. To criticize them by those who are not.
Normally,
The same way we cannot say I'm holier than thou. They have no business saying, oh, you all are crazy, or you all this, or you all are Christian, because that's another thing I've noticed when within the world of the Jews. I always thought that we were all the same. But within this world, they tend to label Christian if somebody happens to pray more than he does. And why? That's none of your business. And where you want him to be telling you to do. So it works both ways, what I'm saying.
and I don't disagree with you. The dynamic that we are living in for the last 200 plus years is that once we had denominations, before we had denominations, I would agree with everything you said just now. But when we had Orthodox and conservative and Reform and even Reconstructionist, one of the byproducts of being in denominational Judaism is that every denomination thinks they're right. You can tell, to a certain extent, I believe you can tell how important a denomination is by the number of jokes about the denomination. Okay. So for instance, in Reconstructionist Judaism, there are only 3 jokes about Reconstructionism.
Yeah.
So Reconstructionism is not that big. So, but one of the jokes is the only movement that thinks that everyone is right are the Reconstructionists, and everyone knows they're wrong.
Are they called the New Age of Judaism?
No, this is just pure humor. Okay. So what happens though is, and it's not so much now, because one of the nice byproducts of COVID and of the dynamics of the last 20 years is that the institutional divisions are breaking down. And so what happens before then, and even to a certain extent now, is that in Orthodoxy, you can almost not be Orthodox unless you're willing to say that Reform and Conservative are not valid forms of Judaism. If you're conservative, then of course conservative Judaism is the way most of it is, the way people are supposed to go. We are the true inheritors of the rabbinic tradition. I have heard that so many times. And if we're Reform, they would say, well, if Hillel the Elder were alive today, he'd be a Reformed Jew. And the fact of the matter is, if Hillel the Elder were alive today, he wouldn't be anything like we would expect, because he would be something completely different. But each movement believes that it's right, so that those people who profess the philosophy of an individual movement on some level have to be critical of the other movements in order to create the validity of their movement. Yes.
Except when they're in the airport looking for a minion.
That's right.
And that's where the reality hits.
And Leibovitz would then say, that's a good point. Leibovitz would then say, that's true Judaism in the airport when people are looking for a minion, and they'll take anyone except women. I said it first.
Which is wrong. Which is
Okay.
wrong.
We were one short today at Rote, and
Yeah.
there was a woman on the other side of the street.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Linda, would you continue reading, please?
As a religion?
Yeah.
Okay. As a religion that opposes all forms of self-deception, Halachic Judaism surely does not delight a person envisioning religious life as the attainment of a goal. The life of mitzvot, which obligates a person from earliest maturity to death, is not affected whatsoever by any spiritual achievement one may attain. The fulfillment of the mitzvot is the way leading a person toward his God, an infinite way whose goal is never attained and is in fact unattainable. Indeed, it is incumbent upon the Jew to realize that the way is eternal. Mitzvot as a way of life, as a fixed and permanent form of human existence, preserve religion as a goal in itself, and prevent it from turning into a means for attaining a goal. Indeed, most of the mitzvot had no sense unless we regard them in this manner, as an expression of selfless divine service. Most of the mitzvot have no instrumental or utilitarian value and cannot be construed as helping a person fulfill his earthly or spiritual needs. Therefore, the halakha directs its attention to one's duties and not to one's feelings.
Okay,
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not the destination,
it's the journey. It's the journey, and that's the best way of putting it. It's,
No matter what you do, there's more.
right, and if you think that the mitzvot are going to get you closer to God, then you don't understand God.
Right.
This goes back, he's trying to, no, he doesn't understand it either, but he's happy not understanding. He's accepted that. Again, this goes back to one of the ultimate issues in our tradition, which is how can a finite being understand an infinite being? How can we even approach God?
You can't.
The fulfillment of the mitzvah is the way leading a person toward his God.
It's not finite.
So,
And so you want to go as far as you can.
Right.
And as far as your evolution allows.
and what he's saying is, you can't even take the first step. You can't get close to God because God is so completely other. You can get close to what you think your God is, but guaranteed what you think is not. But they're all wrong. That's Miguel, your hand is up. Hold on, Miguel.
Yes, Rabbi, just a single comment. It isn't my intention to understand God. I can't. My intention is to be in love with him. That's what I want to say.
Okay, but how can, and Leibovitz's answer to that would be, how can you be in love with something you do not understand?
I don't understand my wife and I'm in love with her.
That is the most profound statement I have ever heard.
That's perfect.
She's right here, by the way. She's right.
I'm listening. We will talk later.
Miguel, as someone who's divorced, I'd have to agree. I didn't understand either. But you understand the point. His point is, you can't you can project onto God. By the way, this goes back to Maimonides. You can project onto God what you think God is, but you are guaranteed to be wrong. Because it's only your projection. And by the way, you and I said exactly the same thing when you're saying that spirituality is individual and that it depends on the evolution of the individual person. All he would say to that is, you're projecting your spirituality onto an infinite being, which can't be.
In his mind.
Yes. And then he would
In
say,
his mind.
that's right, in his
This is-
mind.
So that
But
says
you would
all.
both be agree, but you would,
Student, for example, and so because it would be
Yeah.
like me criticizing Einstein because I don't know science. You know, when we don't know something, the first thing we say, oh, that's dumb. Yes or no, so you want to react, oh, that's dumb, because we don't understand.
he's not
But-
saying it's dumb. What he's saying is, well, he's not saying it's dumb. He's saying it's Sfardea. So that's a joke, by the way.
Yeah.
If you got the pass, it's not dumb, it's Sfardea. Sfardea. Dumb, Sfardea, Arov, Kinim,
Got it.
10 place. No, what he's saying is, by doing that, it's
that-
not that it's dumb. Oh, come on, it was horrible. Are you kidding? So by
I like
that Arov, we're up to Arov. What he's saying is it's not that it's wrong. It's counterproductive from his point of view, because it's not going to work. That's all he's saying. And then he's saying it's wrong.
I take this prediction, but I'm not inside Joe, so I don't know what his goals are, what his spiritual, how it's going to affect it. I cannot say a word about it because I'm not inside.
Yeah,
That's what it's individual,
yes.
so you have to respect that.
He's right. And he'd say that his answer, I can tell you exactly what his answer was, because we had this argument with him in class. So literally we had it. And what he said was, listen, You want to be spiritual? Fine. Are you doing the mitzvot?
Right.
Yeah, well, I agree.
And he said, and
That's
if
all
you
that
said,
matters.
are you, if you're doing the mitzvot and you want to be spiritual, geh gesund hate, which is Yiddish, which means go and have a good time.
Remember when we walked back, we had some kind of attempt to terrorize few people, some folks were there's a secret assassination, this and that.
Yeah, yeah, when the ones who were with their signs, sure. Sure, with their signs across the street.
The individual thing, well, if you think about all of this, well, we have to do more research.
Right.
There you
I
go.
kind of a lot, I like how this is, I'm not gonna deny, I love it. But that was the answer, so there, the only thing
There you
is,
go.
doesn't mean you don't even do it, you have to do it.
Well, no, but Leibovitz's statement is in liberal Judaism, we don't do the mitzvot. So we are much, and he, by the way, he say the same thing about Hasidim, the Hasidim. So because he would be saying you put spirituality above doing mitzvot, and it's reversed.
People very commonly today say, I'm not really religious, but I'm spiritual.
Right, and
It's
his
meaningless. It's
right,
actually meaningless.
and that would be his response. So, all right, so we've done Leibovitz. I'm not sure we're meeting next week because I may have a conflict that I have to deal with, but we'll send out an email about whether we are meeting or not. And we're going to be doing a more Hasidic view of what the mitzvot are
Awesome.
next week or the week after.
Awesome. Yasher Koach.
Okay, Zoomers, have a good day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. You'll let me know if you're going to be on next week?
I will.
Okay, thank you.